That watch belonged to my son. Vivian Holt's voice cut through the hotel lobby like something breaking. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned, and Theo Marsh, who had been standing at the concierge desk with his sleeve rolled back, felt the blood leave his face before he understood why. He knew the woman. Everyone in the room knew her. Vivian Holt, 71 years old, widow of Gerald Holt, the man whose name was on 3 hospitals and a wing of the art gallery 2 blocks east. She had arrived for the Holt Foundation's annual charity dinner the way she always arrived, ahead of schedule, dressed in gray silk, carrying the particular silence of someone who had never once been told no. Theo was not a waiter. He was not a valet. He was the events manager for the Meridian Grand, and he had worked this gala for 4 consecutive years. He knew where every floral arrangement was placed. He knew which suite the foundation had booked. He knew the name of the head chef and the preference of every board member for table water. What he had not expected, standing there checking the evening's run sheet against his clipboard, was for a 71-year-old woman to walk toward him with her finger pointed at his wrist. "I'm sorry?" Theo said. Vivian Holt did not repeat herself. She had never needed to. "That watch," she said again, stepping closer. "The one on your wrist. That was my son's." The lobby of the Meridian Grand held somewhere around 40 people at that moment. Hotel guests moving toward the elevator bank. Foundation staff arranging name placards near the ballroom doors. A photographer from the Foundation's communications team, who had been capturing candid arrivals, and who had very quietly raised his camera. Theo looked down at the watch on his left wrist. He had worn it every day for 11 years. "Mrs. Holt," he said carefully. "This watch belonged to my father." Her eyes did not soften. They were pale gray, the color of February sky, and they held the same quality as her voice. Composed, certain, and slightly dangerous in the way that things are dangerous when they have never been questioned. "Your father." The words arrived like a verdict already written. "Yes. And where did your father get it?" Theo's jaw tightened. Around him the quiet had deepened. The photographer had stopped pretending to shoot the flower arrangements. "He wore it his whole life," Theo said. "He gave it to me before he passed." Vivienne Holt looked at him the way someone looks at a door they believe should not be open. Then she turned, not to Theo but to the room, and said, at full volume, "I want hotel security. Now." The sound that moved through the lobby after that was not a gasp exactly. It was more like the collective sharp intake of breath before a gasp. Something restraining itself. Theo did not move. His hands were cold. His pulse had gone strange and too fast in his ears. He had worked this hotel for 9 years. He had hosted prime ministers and film premieres and one very complicated visit from a minor royal. He had managed crises in this building. A kitchen fire, a flooded suite, a keynote speaker who arrived 3 hours late. He had never stood in the center of his own lobby while someone implied, loudly with witnesses, that something on his body did not belong to him. He kept his voice level. "Mrs. Holt, I understand you may recognize this style of watch, but I can assure you, it isn't the style," she said. "It's the watch. I know it. I had it commissioned." Theo said nothing for a moment. A man in his mid-40s appeared from the direction of the ballroom. Foundation staff. Theo recognized him. Owen Holt, Vivienne's younger son, the one who handled logistics for the charity events. He was wearing a dinner jacket and an expression that suggested he had already been briefed by someone's whisper. "Mother," Owen said, arriving at her shoulder. "What's happened?" "That man is wearing Julian's watch." Owen looked at Theo. There was no accusation in his face. Only the particular discomfort of someone who had spent a lifetime managing his mother's certainties. "I'm sure there's an explanation," Owen said. "There is," Theo said. "My father gave it to me." Vivienne turned toward Owen as if Theo had not spoken. "I had that watch made for your brother, custom commissioned, single piece. There is no other one like it anywhere." Owen's expression tightened. Theo looked down at the watch again. He had looked at it 10,000 times, but not like this. Not with the feeling that the room was looking with him. It was a dress watch. Square face, silver case, a dark olive leather strap that Theo had replaced twice over the years because the original had worn through. His father, Leonard Marsh, had worn it to every event that mattered for as long as Theo could remember. His parents' anniversary dinners, his sister's university graduation, Leonard's retirement lunch, where he had stood up at a long table and made a toast that had made everyone at the table cry. Theo had slipped it onto his own wrist the morning after Leonard's funeral and had not taken it off since. "My father's name was Leonard Marsh," Theo said. "He worked in hotel management in Vancouver for 32 years. He passed away 11 years ago. This watch was in a wooden box in his closet. He gave it to me." Vivienne's chin lifted. "And how precisely did Leonard Marsh come to possess a watch that I had commissioned for my son?" The lobby had gone completely still now. The name placards near the ballroom had been abandoned. Security had not arrived, but 2 hotel staff members had positioned themselves nearby in the way that people do when they are waiting for someone else to make the first move. Theo looked at Owen Holt. Owen looked back at him, and something in his expression shifted, not suspicion but a careful kind of attention. The look of a man running calculations. "When did Julian receive the watch?" Owen asked, turning to his mother. "His 30th birthday," Vivienne said. "April 1989. Theo said nothing. He did a quiet calculation of his own. His father would have been 41 years old in April 1989. My father had this watch before I was born, Theo said. Vivian's eyes narrowed. That is not possible. He wore it in photographs from the 1980s. I have seen them. Then someone made a copy. Theo took a breath that was steadier than he felt. Mrs. Holt, my father did not own a counterfeit watch. He was not that kind of man. The words landed more sharply than he ended. Vivian's face tightened. You have no idea, she said. What kind of people steal from families like mine? The sentence moved through the room like cold air from a door left open in January. Families like mine. Theo had grown up in East Vancouver, in a house where the furnace was unreliable and the kitchen had linoleum floors that his mother recovered herself, because she had learned how from a library book. His father had taken a bus to work for 2 decades before he saved enough for a used car. He had packed his own lunch in the same metal container for 30 years. He was not a wealthy man, he had never pretended to be, but he had been an honest one. Theo set his clipboard down on the concierge desk. His hands were very steady now. Something had settled in him, the same thing that settled whenever accusation became too big to manage from the outside and had to be handled from the inside instead. I would like to know, he said, what Julian Holt's watch looked like, specifically. Vivienne blinked. It was a small movement, but Owen noticed it. So did Theo. I just told you, she said. Silver case. That's it. Described several thousand watches, Theo said. Not unkindly. But clearly, a woman near the ballroom entrance, Foundation board member, Theo believed her name was Patricia something, had lowered her phone very slightly. The photographer had gone very still. Vivian's voice cooled further. I know what I saw. Then describe what you haven't described yet, Theo said. Is there anything specific? An engraving? A marking? Something that would distinguish this particular watch from any other square-faced silver dress watch made in the same decade? Owen turned toward his mother. Vivian Holt was not accustomed to being questioned. That was clear in every line of her body. She had been the kind of woman that rooms rearranged themselves for, who sat at the head of foundation boards and chaired long meetings and made decisions that people accepted without needing to understand the reasoning. But Theo could see, watching her, that the question had landed somewhere unsteady. There is an engraving, she said at last, on the case back. Julian's initials. Owen exhaled slowly. J. Yes. Theo held her gaze. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for the clasp on his watch strap. The lobby was absolutely silent. He turned the watch over in his palm and placed it on the concierge desk face down. Then look, he said. For a long moment no one moved. Then Owen stepped forward. He bent slightly over the watch, studying the back of the case. Vivian did not move. She watched her son, not the watch. Owen straightened. There's an engraving, he said. Vivian's face changed. The room seemed to breathe. Owen picked up the watch carefully, the way you pick up something that might mean more than you expected. He tilted it toward the chandelier light. The letters caught the gold warmth of the overhead fixtures. LM, he said, and a date, September 14, 1983. Vivian Holt said nothing. Theo said quietly, my father's name was Leonard Marsh. His birthday was September 14th. He turned 35 in 1983. Owen looked at his mother. Vivian was still looking at the watch. Theo did not rush the moment. He had learned a long time ago that silence properly held was more effective than anything spoken into it. He had learned that from his father actually. Leonard Marsh had been a quiet man, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that some truths needed space before they could be heard. Vivian reached for the watch. Theo said, I'd like you to look, not take. Her hand stopped. Owen looked at Theo and something moved through his expression that Theo could not fully name. Respect, possibly. Surprise, probably. Something else underneath both of those. Vivian stared at the engraving for a long time. LM. September 14, 1983. The year Julian Holt had turned 12 years old. Theo knew this because he had done the arithmetic. If Julian would have turned 30 in April 1989, he had been born in 1959. He had been 12 when this watch was made. Engraved with another man's initials, another man's birthday, 6 full years before Vivian claimed it had been commissioned for her son. Mrs. Holt, Theo said. His voice was even. He was not performing calm, he was simply standing because there was nowhere else to stand. If this watch was made for Julian in 1989, why does it carry my father's initials and a date from 1983? Vivian looked at Owen. Owen did not look away from Theo. He said, without direction, that's a fair question. The murmur that moved through the lobby was different now. Not scandal. Something more complicated. The kind of sound a room makes when the ground has shifted and everyone is trying to find their footing. Vivian's voice when it came was slightly smaller than before. Not defeated, not apologetic, smaller. I may have been mistaken, she said. About the design. Theo looked at her. Or about the watch. Her eyes snapped to his. The gray in them was colder now, but there was something else, a flicker. Something that lived behind certainty when certainty is challenged. Owen said, Mother, can we discuss this somewhere private? No. The word came out of Theo before he could measure it, and then because it had come out he let it stay. She accused me in front of this room. I'll answer in front of this room. A beat. Owen looked at him. To Theo's surprise, the man nodded. Vivian had not moved, but something in her posture had. The absolute verticality of it, the way she had walked into this lobby, that had shifted fractionally, like a building that has been struck and is waiting to understand the damage. Theo picked up the watch from the desk and held it in his palm. I need to tell you about my father, he said. He had not planned to say it. He did not plan what came after either. But the watch was in his hand and the room was listening, and his father's name had been connected, even loosely, even by implication, to the word that Vivian Holt had not quite said but had placed in the air like a hanging accusation. And Theo found that he was not able to let that go. Leonard Marsh worked his entire adult life in hotel and hospitality management, Theo said. He started as a dishwasher in a hotel kitchen in Prince George when he was 19 years old. He worked his way up to operations manager by the time he was 45. He retired at 67 and spent his last 3 years growing tomatoes in his backyard and teaching my nephew to fish. No one in the lobby spoke. He wore this watch to my sister's wedding, Theo said. He wore it the day he walked me into my first proper job interview and told me to stand up straight. He wore it on Christmas morning every year, even when the Christmas was difficult, and there were some that were very difficult, and he wore it anyway because it was the one that mattered. Owen had gone very still. Vivian had not looked away. He was not a rich man, Theo continued. He did not own a summer house or a foundation. He owned a reliable winter coat, a good set of tools, and this watch. He treated all three with the same care. A woman near the back of the lobby, one of the catering staff who had been pretending to organize napkins, had stopped pretending. Theo looked at Vivian Holt. I don't know why you saw this watch and believed it was Julian's. I am sorry for what happened to your son. I know he passed away several years ago. That is a grief I cannot speak to. But the grief I can speak to is the one that comes when someone holds up a piece of the person you've lost and tells you it doesn't belong to you. Vivian's mouth tightened. My father gave me this watch on his last good day, Theo said. He could still sit up. He still knew my name. He put it in my hand and told me he'd had it longer than he'd had almost anything else, and he wanted me to have it because he knew I'd take care of it the same way he did. The watch caught the chandelier light again. LM September 14, 1983. Owen turned to his mother. His voice was low. Mum, Julian's watch, do you remember what the engraving was? Vivian's jaw set. His initials. Yes, you're certain? A pause. A terrible, informative pause. I commissioned it, Vivian said. But she said it the way you say something when you are trying to remember whether it is true. Owen looked at Theo. Could we? Is there somewhere we could look at this more carefully, privately? Theo considered. Then he said, my office. If Mrs. Holt would like to look at the watch properly, she's welcome to do that in my office. But I will be present, and the watch stays with me until this is resolved. Vivian stiffened. Owen said, that's reasonable, Mum, and something in Vivian Holt's face, not defeat, not softness, but something between the two shifted. She walked toward the office. Owen followed. Theo carried the watch. The lobby, released from its stillness, slowly exhaled. Theo's office was small and practical. A desk, 2 chairs, a credenza with a coffee machine, and a framed photograph of the Meridian's lobby from 1962 before the last renovation. It smelled like printer paper and faintly the lemon cleaning product the housekeeping staff used on the baseboards. He set the watch on the desk between them, face up. Vivian sat. Owen stood to the side. No one spoke for a moment. Then Vivian said, I was not trying to harm you. Theo looked at her. I saw the watch and I thought. She stopped. Her hands were in her lap, perfectly still, but Theo could see the effort that stillness required. Julian loved watches. He had several. When he died, many of his things disappeared. I was told some were taken by people who had worked with him. People who had been in his apartment. I have spent 4 years assuming that anyone wearing a watch like this was one of them, Theo said. Vivian did not answer. That was an answer. Owen said carefully, after Julian passed, some things did go missing. It was a difficult time. There was a dispute about the estate. I understand? Theo said. He did understand. Grief made people look for explanations. It made people look for something to be angry at that wasn't random and indifferent and impossible to confront. He had felt that pull himself in the months after his father died. The strange desire for there to be a reason, a person to blame, something with edges. But grief was not jurisdiction. Theo turned the watch over and pointed to the engraving. My father's birthday, he said. 40 years ago next September. There's a photograph at my mother's house in Burnaby. My father standing in the kitchen, Christmas 1983, wearing this watch for what I assume was the first time. He would have been 35. I can get you that photograph. Owen looked at his mother. Vivian was looking at the engraving. LM September 14, 1983. How did your father come to have it? She asked. I don't know, Theo said honestly. He never told me the story and I never thought to ask. I just knew it was his. Vivian's eyes lifted to him. For the first time they held something other than certainty. Julian's watch had a small scratch on the inner case, she said. From a repair in 2007. There was a replacement screw that left a mark. Theo opened the clasp and tilted the watch. The inner case was smooth. 40 years of careful handling but no repair mark. No scratch from 2007, Owen exhaled. Vivian stared at the smooth inner case for a long time. Then she did something Theo had not expected. She reached into her handbag and withdrew her phone. She scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward him. It was a photograph of a watch. Square face, silver case, dark strap. Superficially similar to Theo's father's watch. The same era, the same basic design. But when Theo looked at it, he could see the differences. The face was slightly larger. The indices were different. And on the back of the case, barely visible in the photograph's angle, was a small scratch just left of center. Julian's watch, Vivian said. The two watches had nothing in common except a general silhouette and an era. Theo said nothing for a moment. Then, these are not the same watch. No, the word came out quietly. They're not. Owen put a hand on his mother's shoulder. She did not move away from it. Vivian Holt sat in a small office chair in the back of a hotel, looking at a photograph of a watch that was not the one on the desk in front of her, and the immovable quality that had filled the lobby outside. The absolute weaponized certainty was simply gone. What was left was an old woman who had lost her son and had spent 4 years looking for him in places that were never going to hold him. Theo understood that. He did not find it difficult to understand. He had lost his own father and spent the better part of a year after that, picking up his phone to call him before remembering, and then standing there with the phone in his hand and nowhere to put the call. But he also thought about the 40 people in the lobby. The photographer with his camera raised. The staff members near the doors. The catering woman with the napkins. He thought about his father's name, spoken in a room full of strangers, attached to the weight of implication. Mrs. Holt, Theo said, I need you to understand what happened out there. Vivienne looked at him. You used your name as a weapon in my lobby, against an employee in his own workplace, in front of guests, in front of staff. His voice was careful, not angry, but clear. Whatever grief brought you to that moment, I need you to understand that what it looked and sounded like, where I was standing, and from where 40 other people were standing, was an accusation loud and public and aimed at me. Vivienne's lips pressed together. She was not used to being spoken to this way. That was visible. Owen said nothing. He was letting this happen. Theo appreciated that. I don't doubt that you loved Julian, Theo continued. I don't doubt that you've been looking for him in everything you've lost since he died. I know what that looks like. My family did the same thing after my father passed. You reach for pieces. Something moved through Vivienne's face. Pain, real and old. But my father is a piece too, Theo said. And in that lobby, you nearly took him from me again, in front of everyone. Outside, through the closed door, Theo could hear the low movement of the lobby returning to its business. Vivienne looked down at the watch on the desk. LM September 14, 1983. I was wrong, she said. The words were not loud. They did not carry any of the force that her accusation had carried 30 minutes earlier. But they were complete. I was wrong, she said again, and this time it sounded less like a statement and more like something she was trying to make herself believe fully. I saw something that looked familiar and I stopped asking questions. Owen squeezed her shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. Theo picked up the watch. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it the way he always felt it. Solid and small and reliable. Are you prepared to say that in the lobby? He asked. Vivienne looked up. What I'd like, Theo said, is for the people who heard you accuse me to hear you correct it. Not because I want the theater of it, but because my staff was in that room. Some of them will be thinking about what they saw for a long time, and I would rather they think about what comes after it. Owen looked at his mother. Vivienne Holt stood up from the chair. She was small standing. Theo had not noticed that before. In the lobby she had seemed larger than the room. Here she was just a woman of 1 in gray silk, with her son's hand near her arm and her own grief wearing her from the inside. All right, she said. They walked back through the corridor toward the lobby. Theo walked slightly behind them, the watch held in his left hand. He could feel his own pulse in his palm. Or perhaps he was feeling the pulse of the watch itself. The old steady heartbeat of a thing built to last. The lobby looked up when they entered. The photographer was still there, the board member near the ballroom, the catering staff. Several people who had arrived since and had clearly been quietly briefed by someone who had been present. Vivienne Holt stopped in the center of the lobby. She did not look at the room the way she had looked at it before. She looked at it the way you look at something you have broken and are returning to. I made an accusation this evening, she said. Her voice carried. She had a voice built for rooms and even diminished it carried. Against Theo Marsh, the events manager of this hotel. I accused him of wearing a watch that belonged to my son. The lobby held. I was wrong. She paused. The watch is his. It belonged to his father. I allowed grief to override my judgment, and I am sorry for what that cost this man in front of his colleagues and his guests. She looked at Theo. I am sorry, Mr. Marsh. Theo looked at her for a moment. Then he said, thank you, not forgiveness, not warmth, but acknowledgement, honest and clear and sufficient for a lobby full of people who needed to know the shape of what had happened. Owen exhaled. The photographer lowered his camera completely. The board member near the ballroom was looking at her shoes. Theo turned the watch over and clipped it back onto his wrist. The familiar weight of it settled against his skin where it had always been, where it belonged. The foundation dinner proceeded 2 hours later. Theo oversaw it, as he always did. The table arrangements, the timing of the courses, the small adjustments that nobody noticed because they were handled before they became problems. Near the end of the evening, Owen Holt found him in the corridor outside the ballroom. "She doesn't apologize easily," Owen said. "I know," Theo said. He did know. He had spent a career reading rooms, and he could read people the way rooms could be read. The load-bearing walls, the weak points, the places where light came in. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The watch Julian had, we never found it. After he died, it just wasn't there." Theo nodded. "I hope you find it." Owen looked at him. "Do you know anything?" "I'm not accusing, I don't," Theo said simply. "I've had this watch my whole life. I don't know where your brothers went." Owen nodded. He seemed to believe it. "I'm sorry for what happened in the lobby. Your mother apologized," Theo said. That was the important part. After Owen left, Theo stood in the corridor for a moment alone. The sound of the dinner came through the ballroom doors, the low register of conversation, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the stage, the discreet percussion of cutlery. He looked at the watch. His father had stood in a kitchen in 1983 wearing it for the first time. And he had been 35 years old, and he had probably not known then that the watch would outlast him by decades, and travel with his son into a hotel lobby in a city that had not existed in the same form when the engraving was new. Theo did not know the whole story of the watch. He suspected he never would. There were things about his father he had not known. People Leonard had been before he was a father. Years that had happened before Theo was around to see them. That was true of every person. The version of someone you knew was always partial. But he knew the version that mattered. He knew the man who had worn this watch to the things that counted. He knew the hands that had kept it wound. And he knew, standing in a corridor outside a ballroom, that when someone tried to take that from you, not the object but the story, the person behind it, you did not put your hands down. You kept them exactly where they were. He straightened his jacket. He checked the watch one more time, not for the time, just for the familiar weight of it. Then he walked back into the ballroom to finish the evening, which he did, quietly and without incident, the way his father had always finished difficult things.